Thanks for tuning in today. Recording the episode you're about to listen to was an adventure in itself. There were some hiccups along the way that corrupted some portions of the show. We did still want to share it, as today's topic was important to both of us. So we leaned into our show's name, re-recorded corrupted lines, and patched them in, which you will definitely hear. Thanks again for joining us, and on with the show. Hi, this is Jordan.
And I'm Bryan, and you're listening to The Quality Varies.
So it's been a couple weeks, Bryan. You have been very busy.
Very extremely, yes.
I mentioned in the last episode that I applied for an event over on the other side of the country. I'm over in Washington right now, and there's an event over in Missouri happening throughout the summer and the year for D&D and kind of a camping thing out there, and I actually got accepted.
Yay! That's awesome.
So, not a whole ton of money. Actually, I will count it a success if after all of my expenditures that I want to make for it, if I zero out, I'll call that a win. But I think it'll be an awesome experience, and yeah, I'm kind of excited about it. I kind of have the beginnings of an outline, and I think your group will be subject a little bit to that outline as I continue to flesh it out, and you guys will have to give some peer reviews on it, I think.
Well, I'm definitely down to do that. I'm very happy for you, man. I know how great of a DM you are, and so they made a good choice in picking you.
Well, it's about pirates, so I'm going about as safe as possible with my story.
That's all right. Everybody loves pirates.
So, but other than that, real estate has been nice and busy here, and the rest of the country are continuing to have one of the hottest markets that we've ever seen. But what about you? What has been going on in the household?
So I moved from Salt Lake back to St. George, back to my old stomping grounds. I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology last winter, technically, and was just looking for work, looking for a little bit more of a big boy job, and I got a call from my old boss at Desert Solace, and he was like, "Hey, I've got this amazing opportunity, and I want you yesterday." And I said, "Well, let me find a place to live, and I'll be there as soon as I can." And okay, so it was like 10 days later. So I got a job offer, and then 10 days later, I moved across the state into a wonderful house that we're renting. It's absolutely perfect for my family, and I am just incredibly grateful and blessed for my life and all the opportunities I've just been handed. So I'm super stoked to be back down in St. George.
The place does look amazing that you guys are staying in, and I heard from you that your wife takes a lot of the credit for her efficiency in finding such a place quickly for you guys to get down here.
I'd say pretty much every good thing that happens in my life can be almost completely accredited to her, because she's fantastic. She just found this place, texted the landlords right away, and she just sweet talked our way into it. So yeah, many thanks to my wife, Maddie.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm excited for you. You said a lot of good things on the show before about your experiences at Desert Sauce. My experience there as a client was impactful, to say the least. And so during this interim period, while you guys are figuring things out, it's an
great.
exciting thing.
It's they actually moved centers, so it's at a different location, but it's all the same. We still teach the same stuff. It's all fantastic, addiction recovery. And last week was my first week back, and one of my old coworkers, I guess, I consider him more of a friend. He came back. Shane Scott comes and teaches these kind of lesson, kind of group discussion things at Desert Solace, and I sat in on one of his groups last week, and it just it just affirmed to me that Desert Solace is just such a fantastic place for me, and and learning so much about how to be. How do I say this? How to be better. Just be better. I don't know how else to say that.
Can I suggest my experience there was
Yeah.
my experience there was I learned how to be more true to myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that is finding out what or who you really are. Do you agree?
I would, and I think that my understanding is you want to actually dive into that a little bit here today, and that's kind of what
I do.
want to talk about. Real quick for the folks, I don't know if we've gone into it before. Do you want to give like the brief overhead on what Desert Solace is?
Yes. Desert Solace is a pornography and sex addiction rehabilitation center. It's an inpatient rehab. Clients come and live there. At the center, it is a ranch. There are horses on the property. And equine therapy is a big part of the recovery process, which we can talk about later because that is also amazing and powerful and life-changing, I think. But yeah, today I kind of want to talk about identity and how we kind of get confused about who we are, and kind of some things some mental exercises that we can run through to see where we're at and check in with ourselves. So let's get right in.
Let's do it. Now, for the folks that are listening, this won't be necessarily a lighthearted episode. We'll dive in a little bit, and one of the things that we love to do both in Desert Solace and for myself in recovery in general is I love the fact that I get to joke as much as I get to be deadly serious about a lot of the things that go on in my life and my experiences and some of these topics. And some of this will be the more serious stuff
for sure.
So just a heads up for that.
So let's talk about identity. Identities are, how would you define identity, Jordan?
I purposely didn't look up the definition for it, and I actually have kind of a hard time giving a definition for identity. I would say a way to describe myself. One method of being able to describe myself, a sense of grouping. That's kind of what I came up with so far. How close am I to what you kind of have in mind?
Really close. Yeah, I think you got it there. So we create these identities for ourselves to feel like we're a part of something, but also paradoxically to feel like we're unique and special.
And what are some examples of, you want to throw out some examples of some of these identities somebody might put themselves into?
Big ones are like people identify as their sexuality. Like, I am gay, or I am straight, or I am whatever, right? That's a big one that people throw around. Another one, I don't want to get political, but I am a Republican, or I am a Democrat. That's a very big, popular identity that we hear about a lot. Or conservative or liberal. I am an addict. That's a very common one to hear in the recovery world. Your job title is a very common identity. I am a real estate agent, or I am a pilot, or I am a full-time student, or I am a butcher. Whatever you do for a living, that's kind of the easiest way to describe yourself to someone you're meeting, and also describe what you do most of your time. It's a tool that we use to make our lives easier, but a lot of times what an identity does is it gets in the way or makes things harder to experience the most that life has to offer, or experience something else other than what you know.
And real quick, I want to touch base on you mentioned, identifying with your work. And I know for myself, it's very hard sometimes to have a conversation with somebody new.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic of what one does for a living or what one does for work is very hard to avoid. And some people, sometimes it's a game.
Right.
Even some people discuss it as a game of just how long can you go before the first person asks, like, so what do you do for a living? Because it's just people have gotten very used to that's the main topic of conversation, or a main topic
Yeah,
of
for sure.
conversation. I just think that's very interesting. Is that such a quick thing that many folks turn to, myself included.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but my last job up in Salt Lake, I worked at a pest control company, and I've talked to you briefly about the culture there. And like many kind of newish companies, tech companies, I don't know, like kind of trendy companies. I don't know, they're kind of the trendy thing to do in a business now is to kind of cultivate this belonging, and part of that is getting the employees to identify as employees of this company. And that was something that I really struggled with personally, because I, on the one hand, knew from my experience at Solace that identities really only lead to identity crises. And also, it was so easy to just say, I'm a service pro at Aptiv, to just kind of be done with that. So there was this kind of dichotomy that was just battling in my head. Like, I know that I'm not just a service pro. I'm so much more than just what I'm telling people I am, which is really what we're trying to talk about today, is that you are more than anything you could identify as. And I think that's the big the big takeaway, I guess, is that you're more than than anything you identify as, which is where all the problems come from, and it's why we're making this distinction, and that's why we're talking about it right now. Is that when you identify with something, you're limiting yourself to only what you're identifying as. And I had so much more to offer than just a service pro at a pest control company. And towards the end of my term there, of working there, I kind of started to believe that, like, that's all I was I'm just entry level worker at a pest control. And that was really hard for me mentally to kind of deal with. Even though I knew, somewhere in my mind, I knew that none of what I was thinking was true, but that part of me that just kind of got sucked into that culture started to buy into it. And I experienced some depression over it, over not living up to what I intrinsically knew deep down that I was capable of.
And during that time that you felt yourself, if I'm hearing it correctly, placing this identity upon yourself of this connected to this work after the fact, is there a different truth that you can look at the past now and kind of describe? I mean, the direct question, I mean, what was the truth of that situation versus
reality was that I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, and I needed something to just help make ends meet. And that's what the job started out as. And it continued to be just a means of income for a very long time, until I graduated. And then that's when I started to buy into the whole culture thing, and all those problems started coming up. But now, having come out of that experience, I'm looking back and I'm just seeing that it is what it started out to be. It was a means to an end. It was a stepping stone to the next part of my life. And it doesn't and didn't ever define me. It was something that I chose into to just for the moment. It really doesn't say anything about me, and it doesn't mean anything about me intrinsically as a person that I worked at a pest control company. And that's kind of the benefit of not identifying as something, even though it's hard, is that you don't have these turmoils of not living up to yourself, or I don't know, not liking yourself, I guess. Yeah, I didn't like myself that much after I graduated, and I was still at a pest control.
So if I'm hearing, so because of the identity that you placed upon yourself, that you were becoming just somebody that is at a pest control company.
Yeah.
At face value and deeper, that was different than what you had envisioned for yourself. And you stepped into sadness and other things for that. And working at a pest control company isn't inherently a negative or bad thing.
Absolutely not. No, yeah, it was very much the judgments that I placed on that and the labels that I put on that and myself. Like you said, it's not intrinsically good or bad, and neither is any identity. It's just something that I noticed, or something that I noticed and am noticing now.
I think I can think of a lot, and maybe that can be something the listeners think about a little bit. But folks get out of high school, or maybe during high school, or at any point in time, somebody might find themselves. And I had these thoughts when I've found myself in that spot in an entry level job at a point in their life where they didn't want to be in an entry level job. They wanted to be doing something different. There's nothing wrong with those type of jobs that are labeled like that, but because it is different than what I want, than the judgments that I have for myself, and maybe even the judgments that I have for others that are in those positions, which again are other identities or judgments that I'm placing on other people without real reason, then I have this identity crisis. And I feel I put myself down for something that really doesn't have anything to do with me as a person. This lines up kind of nicely. I was reading a book today, kind of lining up with my work. It was kind of a motivational book, but in it, a gentleman speaks about becoming a real estate agent in New York, and for a time, his whole work was just a bunch of young folks that, in his mind, his identity was just he was just helping find very cheap apartments that 10, 12 of them could go group up in for these extremely low rent amounts. And that was his life. People just coming to him with $20 and saying they need an apartment in New York, and that was his identity. And when somebody approached him asking him to find them a $2.5 million apartment in New York, he didn't know what to do with himself, because that didn't line up with the identity that he had accepted of himself doing this job in New York. Luckily for him, he stepped into that, and that was a life-changing thing. But it was very interesting to hear him describe that everything about him was kind of tied up with this, in his mind, menial work that he was doing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting, and I can relate to that in some ways, as far as, this is the capacity that I can do for no other reason than this is what I've done in the past.
Yeah, exactly. That guy, he was pretending like he was something that he wasn't. He was pretending like all he was good for was all that he had accomplished, like you mentioned. That's a safe place to be, acknowledging what you've done and not reaching for anything else. But sometimes that's painful. Sometimes that doesn't work for us. But we hold on to it because it's safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what's the other side of that? How does one start to step out or become more aware?
Well, you become more aware by being aware. As the old saying goes, at Desert Solace anyway. Once you're aware, then you can start to make different choices. Like that real estate agent in New York. Another opportunity presented himself, which challenged him, which brought him to some level of awareness of this identity he had unwittingly made for himself, and then he was able to choose out and choose into a greater success for himself. So it all starts with awareness, and I think that's the crux of the matter, really, is that we're unaware of how much we're getting in our own way.
One of the things that I want to bring up is, this is another thing that I learned and was able to take to heart in Desert Sauce that lines up nicely with this. Is one of the things that perpetuates that is negative self-talk. And I was told it there, and it took me quite, and I'm still learning it over and over again, but it took me quite a few instances, probably thousands, times of me having this negative self-talk to myself, and then people explaining what the reality of what that was doing to me. But when you have this thought that like, oh, I can't do that, and you can kind of call me on it if I'm describing this incorrectly, but my understanding is my mind does not see any difference in that versus somebody else saying that to me. My mind registers that as those two things as completely the same. And so my my own thoughts to myself
Mm-hmm.
in this negative or self-limiting, as we might say, talk or beliefs is going to register exactly the same way as if somebody were to walk up to me and say these things to me. Do I have that right?
Yes, and not only that, going along with that, your mind can't tell the difference between a scenario that you think up and something that really happened, which is another thing that we do. Whenever I say we, I'm not I'm not just like minimizing. I'm saying like all people do this. This is how society has programmed us all, like all of us, not just me, Jordan, but everybody. Our minds, our brains can't tell the difference between a made up scenario that keeps us up in the middle of the night and what happened at work that day. Your brain takes both of those as equal. They have equal validity. So if you're constantly putting yourself down and imagining situations where you fail, that is reinforcing your inner belief that you are not good enough.
To give an example for myself, I know an easy thing that I can think of is when I was leading up to the state test for the real estate license. And I'm sure a lot of people might be able to relate to a fair number of different kinds of tests that they have had to prepare for. But the scenarios I made up and I was even told, my broker was very nice to me in saying that me failing, if I were to fail the test, that my job is still secure. I don't have to pass the test the first time to become a real estate agent at this firm. And although that was very comforting, magically that did not stop my negative scenarios I was playing in my head, and that, like, oh, that's for normal people, but for you, like, you did so poorly on the test that I am rescinding this offer to you.
Yeah.
You did so poorly that you were out. And I don't know if you can relate to
yeah,
mind
absolutely.
Scenarios like that.
Part of my process of education was after I graduated, after I was done with all of my work, my last semester, I put a lot of effort and work and sleepless nights into applying for grad school. And part of the grad school application process is a standardized test, like you mentioned. And I did not have the luxury of... Oh no, I did have the luxury of the test doesn't really matter, because with COVID, many schools were waiving the test. But I was asking for advice from one of my professors at the U, and she said, take the test anyway, and if you do really good, you can still submit those scores, and if you do bad, then it doesn't really matter. But I also fell into the trap of catastrophizing the test scores before I even took the test. Like, I'm not going to do good, I'm going to do really bad, and it's going to really hurt my application, and I haven't studied enough, what am I doing? I'm not really cut out for this, blah, blah, blah. But I actually didn't do that good. And, I really think that I kind of shot myself in the foot because I was cutting myself down so much. During any time I tried to study, I would just look at the book I was studying from, and it was a tome. It was a big, thick book, and I would just think, what am I doing? I'm not cut out for this. And I did better than I thought I would, but that's not saying much. And it wasn't, the scores that I got were not in the range of the scores that got accepted. They were above the minimum. Like requirement to be able to apply, but they were not in the range of
Gotcha.
Students who got accepted. And I really think that it was these self-limiting beliefs that you were talking about, this identity that I had fallen into, that I'm just a pest control guy, and that's all I'm worth. So there's definitely something real there.
And when the reality of it was still that you had just gotten a certain score on a test that wasn't going to be marked against you.
Exactly. Yeah. And it wasn't marked against me. I still didn't get in, but yeah, that whole test was just a mess for me mentally.
So we've mentioned a couple things here, and as far as being aware of it to start stepping out of it, how do you, so let's take one of these examples. So you're having this negative self-talk or these negative self-beliefs about yourself leading up to a test, and you become aware of it. So what do you do to reverse that? What is your next action?
Yeah, that's a great question. After you're aware of something like this, it can feel very daunting to tell yourself to just stop, right? Like how many times have we just told ourselves to stop doing something we knew was wrong or wasn't going to help us? It doesn't work super well.
One of the things that in addiction recovery, and you can tell me if you think that this would apply here as well, but addiction in general, and these triggering thoughts that would come up. One method is to either write them down or, depending on your comfort with others around you, verbally share it with another person as well if they felt safe hearing it. And oftentimes, writing it down or sharing it with somebody made it very obvious on how ridiculous it sounded, and the power in that lust or that addictive behavior that I was being pulled towards really was lost at the foundation. And maybe, and you can tell me if maybe writing down some of these negative self-talks just to get them in front of you so you can see it in the reality that it is. Do you feel like that would lose its power, or sharing it with another person verbally?
Yeah, I would go to my wife and just tell her what I was thinking. I called my dad one time, or he called me, and we just talked about I just talked about how I felt and my fears and everything, and they did exactly what you said. They pointed out the absurdity of what I was thinking and saying, and they affirmed my true self, not the identity self, not the part of me that it was identifying as all these limiting beliefs. They affirmed the real self, the real self that exists in reality, not my beliefs about myself, if that makes sense. And that helped. It did help. But really, what I was going to say, the next kind of step is to ask yourself, to check in with yourself. Where is this coming from? Who is talking in my head? Which part of me is talking? Is it my real true self? Or is it this identity that I've created for myself? This false sense of self that I've built up around my beliefs around myself, And then the answer to that is usually really powerful in helping you step out of the beliefs, and really allowed me to shake myself out of that and keep moving in a direction that I knew would be beneficial for myself.
So on the other side of it, what is your definition of an affirmation?
A definition of affirmation. I think anything that can be taken as support of a standing reality or evidence. In other words, something that reminds me of what I already know to be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. You confirmed that the mind doesn't see the difference between negative self-talk or self-created scenarios of things not working out versus those things taking place. Does the same thing apply to affirmations and positive feedback?
Yeah, and I think you know this, but these affirmations are much, much more powerful. I mean, when you really hit an affirmation that really, really resonates, you can feel it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it does, and there definitely is power there. I can't help but think, and I don't know why this scene came to mind, but in the the Cars animated movie.
Good pull.
I don't know any of the characters' names. It's been so long, but the main car character at some point in the movie, he's like, "I am speed."
Yeah, that's the opening dialogue of the movie. Yeah,
that's an affirmation to give somebody an example. When if you've seen somebody or in a movie somebody talking to themselves in the bathroom mirror, just saying, I am this, or I am that, I am strong, I am caring. Those are affirmations that folks are giving to themselves.
Right.
What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that's great. The affirmations that I gave and am continuing to give myself as I reapply to grad school and kind of try to figure out what to do to get in at this point are things like, I am capable of this. I have what I need to achieve this goal of getting into grad school. That's an affirmation. I am enough. I am good enough for this. Because that's what it boiled down to before, when I was so afraid of not getting in or not doing well on the test. It was, I'm not good enough. And that was the limiting affirmation that I kept subconsciously giving myself. And so now I see that, I'm aware of it, and now I get to choose a new affirmation. I am enough. I am smart enough. I work hard enough. And that's starting to make an energetic shift in my life. And I feel just tons better now.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned an interesting thing there with shame, and I know for addiction recovery, recognizing and stepping out of shame and really seeing it for what it is, really important part of my recovery. And you mentioned choosing out of shame. Do you want to kind of explain that a bit?
Sure. That can be kind of hard. I get clients that say, well, that's sure is easier said than done. Or it's easy for you to say, just stop feeling shame. But it goes back to, it all kind of comes back to this identity thing that shame comes from not feeling in tune with yourself, essentially. Am I right?
That resonates with kind of my experiences of it. I know, I mean, for me, there's no way that I'm going to be able to step out of shame if I am still identifying with something that doesn't line up or doesn't do me any good. If I'm still identifying with, years ago, I was in a program to do college courses while in high school, and I chose to identify with I couldn't do it. There was no way I was going to be able to accomplish this and be one of those kids that had a college degree at the same time that he was graduating high school. And as long as I hold on to that identity, shame is going to be present. That's half the reason that I identified with it in the first place. And as much as I say, okay, I'm done. I'm stepping out of shame. If I still identify with that same version of me, that's all I'm doing is I'm just saying.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just saying it.
So shame, choosing out of shame, it goes back to accepting reality at all costs. Being aware that shame only comes from this identity that you give yourself. It's something that you get to notice to shift back into truly are, shift back into reality.
And I know that comes up a lot, or that came up a lot in with somebody that has addictions, or, really anything that somebody isn't happy about. I'll use addiction as an example, but somebody with addictive behaviors, or especially sexual addictive behaviors, that could be very far off from their true self. And I think socially for that particular addiction, a lot of folks may think that shame is involved with that. And as long as I just continue to think, oh, I'm just an addict and I am these things that I've done, unfortunately I don't have any idea how I would step out of that shame. But when I become aware and I look at maybe some of my truths, or somebody is kind enough to point some of them out to me and give me some affirmations, and I explore those, then all of a sudden I have a choice. I can look at these differences and what works better for me. Now, again, in the beginning, it was easier said than done, and it becomes easier to do for me once I was able to do it a couple times, and I really saw that it was something that was it was possible. It was how things worked. It was actually something that I was able to do in my life, and I'm overcomplicating explaining that, but once I did it once, then I saw that it was truly a choice. And sometimes, I still step in shame every once in a while these days.
Sure.
But I know that it's a choice. And so it's easier now than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Once you do it, you can remember that you did it. And then once you remember that you did it, you can just bring that into your current predicament. Well, I did it when I was done taking the GRE. For me, like I stepped out of this fear and this shame then, and I just bring that into now, and now I'm starting to do it now. So you kind of teach yourself how to do it eventually, and you just build on it, just like you said. And just one thing that I wanted to point out, though, we've been talking a lot about identity in kind of one direction, that, we identify as less than what we really are. But even identities like that are quote unquote good or quote unquote healthy, they can be equally damaging to us. Like identifying as a father and having that as like a integral part of who you are. This is kind of an extreme example, and I kind of regret picking it now, but what if, heaven forbid, that gets taken away from you somehow? What do you do with yourself if your kids die or divorce, rips them away from you? That is as detrimental to yourself as all of these things that we've been talking about limiting beliefs. This identity of this very noble, good identity of being a father or a husband can be just devastating, bring just absolute pain into your life if it gets taken away, and then you're back in at square one. Who am I without this? And what do I do, and how do I act without this in my life? And you're right back to, well, I'm not good enough. So there's a danger there as well. And it just, to me, it highlights the importance of knowing who you are beyond all of that at a much deeper level. Yeah.
Can I ask, and maybe to be the devil's advocate on that specific example, depending on the faith, if any, somebody has the identity of maybe being a father, depending on somebody's faith, that doesn't necessarily have to change, even if, circumstances have really turned for maybe the worst on this world, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. So what I think you're asking is, even though even though there's a reason to believe that the identity is not truly gone, what do I do then? Is that what you're asking? Is it still detrimental if there's reason to believe that the identity is not truly gone?
Maybe having the identity of a parent. I'm speaking from not being a parent. I can't even take care of plants. So, but I guess my question for you, does that identity have to go away if the child is taken away from you? Or is there a spiritual approach that somebody can take to that at that point and maintain that identity and still have it work for them?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're part of a faith like you and I are, that believes fatherhood is eternal, then absolutely you can hold on to that, and it doesn't have to be a huge issue, but it might be, because you still have to live the rest of your life without those kids, and that's where the identity can kind of come back and hit you. And I'm not saying that you should throw away all of these identities. Part of my very core identity is being a father. That's something that I've thought very deeply on for a long time. It's still something that I identify with, truly. But I will say that does keep the door cracked on shame and guilt when I don't act like a good dad. If I do something that I'm not proud of, if I, yell at my kids, if I snap at my kids or act in anger towards my kids, that's a very, very easy path for shame to come into my life. And I don't discard my identity of being a dad. It's just something that I get to notice and something that I get to work on. Because I do know that I'm better than that. I like to think that I have a pretty good idea of who I truly am. Definitely never going to say that I know myself perfectly, because I still learn things about myself. But I know myself enough to know that being a dad is something that I will always have, and that I'll always identify with and be proud of. And that's something that I to work on is not letting it be a path for the adversary to whittle me down.
Absolutely. And yeah, I was definitely being kind of a devil's advocate for that one. Yeah. I do kind of have another example that I'd like to ask you about. The pandemic there were many folks that
Yeah.
had difficulties that far surpassed anything I had to deal with, and I cannot speak to that. There were a large majority of folks, I would say everybody else in the world, that even if they weren't physically affected by that, or their family was not, work and daily life changed drastically for a lot of folks around the world. Do you feel like there was a lot of identity crisis going on, or I mean, do you feel like there was the reality of it is that there is a lot of disagreements and heated conversations and emotion, what steps should be taken in either direction? Do you feel like any of that is from an identity crisis, from all this displacement?
Absolutely. 100%. Yes. We mentioned identifying as your work. How many business owners lost their business in the pandemic and, and now no longer have the business owner identity. It got taken away from them. Another example of an identity that was working for somebody, was helping somebody, that got taken away and now is causing pain. And it's getting political is something I don't like to do, but I do very firmly agree that the nastiness over the pandemic is definitely, absolutely due to identity crises. Because, whether you identify as conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, any challenge to either philosophy is very, very easy to take as a personal attack, because that is me. I am a liberal. I am a Republican. And you disagreeing with me is a personal attack to my beliefs and my person. So yeah, I absolutely believe that all of that is due directly to an identity crisis.
I heard a lot of folks saying, around me and around the world, saying, I just want life to go back to normal. And that I kind of make the connection with that, in that I see that as holding on to whatever identities, and holding on to that normal that was going on before. And really, in a way, this is a conversation for another day. But resisting, the whole conversation about resisting can be another conversation. But resisting the reality that is. And yeah, so it's an interesting thing to think about. If I can kind of present a visual, and this is kind of how I personally, somebody gave me this concept and I really grasp this is really helpful for me to think about. And this might have been a YouTube that I watched, a video that I watched, or somebody told me about it. I can't really remember too much. This was well before I had even gone to Desert Solace back in 2018. As opposed to my identities being part of me and my ideas being part of me, the visual is that I just have a bowl in front of me, and all of these identities, all of these opinions, all of these facts that I hold to be true are in this bowl. And somebody can walk up and point at it and say, I don't like that thing in your bowl. And that doesn't have anything to do, they're not pointing at me, they're pointing at what's in my bowl. And that's totally fine. I have no problem with them, saying they like this and they don't like that. Or somebody may come up and says, this opinion that you have is wrong.
Yeah.
Or this belief that you have is wrong. I don't have to be defensive about it, because it doesn't have anything. They're still not pointing at me. They're pointing at what's in the bowl. And I can deny that feedback, or I can accept that feedback, and I can take that out of my bowl and I can switch it with something else. I have not changed anything about myself. That's a very... that has remained in my head for many years.
Yeah, that is great. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that. And you can, I think, with that analogy, you can take some of these identities and kind of put part of the identity in your bowl, but kind of keep it on yourself a little bit too. Like, for me, I enjoy being a dad, so I can put that in my bowl. I don't know, Jordan, what I like? I like Dungeons and Dragons. That's my bowl.
Hey.
I get my little brother makes fun of me all the time for playing D&D, and I don't care, because it's not me. I'm not D&D, and so he can make fun of D&D until he's blue in the face, and it doesn't bother me because that's something that's in my bowl. So
As
I
a
really
quick
like that
aside,
analogy.
is your brother
Yeah.
going to be there this month?
Yes. Well, probably.
Good, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to touch on something you mentioned, and we keep coming back to this super deep father thing that you brought up. Um,
Oh boy.
something happens, and because there's pain,
Mhm.
is there anything wrong with pain?
Nope, there's not. And there's nothing wrong with feeling it and hating it. Pain sucks, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just pain. You are not weak for feeling pain. You are not bad or broken for feeling pain. Pain is an experience. Every single human being feels pain. It's part of the human experience. I can say that because I have a bachelor in psychology. That's what I study, is the human experience. Pain is part of it. It doesn't go well. I mean, you don't ever really get rid of it. It's always part of life. So yeah, I've been telling people a lot this last few weeks. Just feel what you feel. Be where you're at. Don't judge the pain that you feel. Just feel it. It's fine. It's not bad.
I want to throw a couple things out there. Let's say, I'm going to throw you under the bus before myself.
Yes.
You didn't get into this college program.
I did not.
And was there pain associated with that?
Yes. Still is. Yeah.
And what, as we've both been kind of taught the same thing, and I'm so glad you have a degree in this, because that means I can say whatever I want and you can just confirm or deny it, and it's all on you. But my experience is denying that pain is about the only thing you can do that's negative. Letting yourself feel that pain is fine.
Yes.
And very healthy.
Yes. I'm gonna. Whatever you fight, you only make stronger. Whatever you try to avoid, you only hold on to tighter. That's why people like me study psychology and become therapists, is because to get through the pain, you have to go through the pain. That's the only way out of it, is through. And that's what therapy is, really. It's guiding you through the pain and the trauma that you've gone through. When you come out the other side, you kind of just realize that, well, I'm not broken. I've been able to deal with this the whole time. I just didn't know how. So yeah, there's absolutely no other way to get rid of the pain other than embracing it.
And I've heard the quote that pain is your body telling you something.
Yeah, it's just information.
I know as well in my recovery. There's a certain person that, and I'm glad that they say it as often as they do, because if they didn't, I would most certainly forget it. In addiction recovery is how they say it, but they say we move at the speed of pain.
Ooh, very good.
Sometimes the resistance that that I have and I'm holding on to, pain is going to be the only thing that gets me to move from my spot. I've selected my battle, and I'm going to fight it as long as possible, but eventually pain is going to move me to do something different. That's very interesting to me, and again, I'm grateful for them sharing that truth with me.
Yeah, that's great. I've never heard that before, but that's awesome.
So what I want to jump over, we've spoken a lot about the harm of identification, but is there anything helpful, or is there anything to be gained with using identity?
Yeah, I think we've touched on the kind of superficial benefits of like feeling worth, feeling part of something, feeling unique in your identity. There's all that stuff, but also like your identity gives you purpose, right? Like my identity as a dad, it gives me drive and motivation to be a good dad. It does fill a role and it does serve a purpose. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. And just like pain, identities are neither good nor bad. They're tricky and they can trip us up. But yeah, absolutely, the identities can be helpful. I think the caveat there is your awareness of your identity and knowing where your true self lies in relation to the identity, if that makes sense.
Mm, I like that. Yeah. One of the things that I thought of is, and again, you can kind of tell me if I'm thinking down the right path. I feel like I can identify with things that don't
Mm-hmm.
have to change. I can identify with truths that can remain constant. I think about I was working at I went from working at a gym that had an
Mm-hmm.
environment that didn't work for me. Very grateful for that workplace though. It taught me a lot. I went from that to job to job to job that didn't work for me. But there were parts of it that I could identify with, and I'll use my current job as an example of that. As I get to this work. I don't know if it works for me to identify my whole
Mm-hmm.
being as I am a real estate agent, because that for example, it doesn't really describe the thing I spend the most time on.
Yeah.
That might not work for me. But what does work for me is I can walk in there and I did identify with what was happening on this team. I could identify with accountability in the teamwork that was used there, and I could identify with a lot of the expectations that they
Mm-hmm.
had for me. As I came to find out, like these were expectations that I felt, were
Right.
right for me, and there are certainly workplaces where expectations do not line up with the truths that
Sure.
I have about myself. And so my claim would be is that there are some things that I can safely identify with, and I can attach, instead of just being in the bowl,
Yeah.
I can attach to myself, as far as personal accountability and other just
Mm-hmm.
core things. That's kind of what I have. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I would add, I guess, I would posit that those things were always a part of your true core, like real self, and you find
Mm-hmm.
them where you go.
Yes, I guess when I'm using identify in that word, I guess that is the
Yeah.
new intention, is that when I'm identifying with them, I'm really aligning with
Yeah.
things are lining
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. And you're aware of it, which is again the key to, if any of those things start to bring you pain or discomfort, the awareness of all of those identities is already there. So you can look at each one and say, is this still working for me, or is it coming from somewhere else that I just think is this?
Mm,
So that's
yeah, and I like it as well because when I identify with that, let's say in the future, I don't have any plans to, but in the future, let's say I'm
mm-hmm.
not a real estate agent anymore. That doesn't have anything to do with what I've identified about myself
Yeah,
as far as
exactly.
personnel accountability. Nothing has changed
Mm-hmm.
about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of want to wrap up. We've been talking for a while about this, and I feel like we've got a really good understanding of identities and what they do for us, and how we can use them to better ourselves, and how we can look at thing we identify with to evaluate if they're still good for us. One thing I struggled with recently is how I go about a how do I talk about this and my identities in a way that's understandable for people who don't understand this like I understand it? And B, how do I explain it succinctly to them so they can understand it if it comes up?
I I do have a hard time with this as well. I will say that I do
Yeah.
give that bowl analogy. That is kind of what I give out,
Okay.
is that's my experience, and it
Mm-hmm.
does help me kind of explain. There's nothing wrong with the opinions that I have or anything that I'm holding on to at the moment, but at the same time, that can be a thing. At the same time, it is not a part of me. It can be separate from me, and it can also be something I'm choosing
Mm-hmm.
into at the same time, and that allows me to choose in and out of it as I want. I would say that in my mind, I connect that to kind of describing identity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think you're right on.
What is there anything else that somebody should be taking away from this episode?
The last thing I'll say, again, I'm gonna steal from the great Shane. Don't believe anything that we said just because
Oh
we said
yes,
it.
oh yes, yes, yes.
Don't believe a word of it. Yeah, go experience it. Go try it out.
Yeah, and I'll do the more formal disclaimer. I don't have a degree. Don't. don't come back at me. And if anybody else at the center hears anything I say and they're like, look at this Muppet. What the heck is he talking about? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you bring up a great point. If you do have some feedback for us, feel free to leave a comment or write a review.
Yes.
We'll definitely read those, and we might bring this back up if somebody brings up a valid counterpoint.
I would love nothing more than one of the first reviews that we get to be a deep response about this episode. Just in the review. Nothing would bring me more pleasure than just a no context response to what we've talked about here.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love that so much.
Well, thanks guys. Thanks for this is a bit of a longer episode, and I think after editing, this will be over an hour, and so I appreciate you listening, and hopefully you were able to take some personal truths away from it. Mm-hmm. So, anything else, Bryan?
Yeah, thank you for making it this far. Pat yourself on the back, because that was a lot, especially for the uninitiated.
Oof. Yes.
Yeah, good job. Thank you again. We really, really appreciate all of our listeners, and give us your feedback. We want to hear. We want to hear what we're doing good, what you want to see us change. We're always trying to improve the podcast.
Thanks, guys.